Hello, hello, Zeteo here. We're going to continue on casting the Alpha Cup, and today we're going to be looking at the round of 6. This set of matches is between Yanami versus FlyingDuck. Yanami, also known as Yudi, and is also known as Chisato. Very, very good 1v1 player. Anyways, let's get into the game here. So Yanami here, I'll probably end up calling him Chisato because that's how I first knew him. But yeah, they've spawned as our red or as our blue Armada player, and their opponent is FlyingDuck, spawned as our red Armada player at the top left here. And this is on Feast of Hades. I'm not 100% sure if this is in order. I was just kind of given the replays, and there was no particular order into it, so. Apologies if this is in the wrong order. But yeah, FlyingDuck here has opened with a Solar into bots. Same thing with Chisato here. Now, I want to talk a little bit about these spawning positions. I mean, both players have elected to spawn in the same location. But yeah, the spawn box, I believe, is like that. So you have the options, you have options to spawn forward, and you have the options to spawn back. Of course, both these players have spawned in the middle here. But yeah, there's definitely an opportunity to spawn in the back and just be a little bit more defensive, being on that high ground. And then if you spawn on the low ground, it becomes a little bit more challenging to get back here to defend it against early aggression. But yeah, Chisato and FlyingDuck taking the middle ground approach, spawning in the middle between those two locations. Yeah, more forward position means it's easier to get to the middle, easier to choke it off, but harder to expand in the initial opener. So that are those are the options in this early game here. But yeah, some ticks coming out. It's Armada versus Armada, so I'd expect to see some ticks early. Grunts deal a little bit better against the ticks now that they have accurate lasers. They can use that range to pick off ticks, and it's really hard for the ticks to, if the grunts are in range, like, they're certainly going to pick off the ticks. First con out for Chisato, taking a radar on the high ground here. Really, really good position. Allows him to see up to this hill here, and I think that's very, very important. If you put it on the low ground, you can't see onto that hill, so defending it becomes a challenge because you don't have the radar spotting for you. Meanwhile, on the other side of the map, it looks like FlyingDuck already has 2 cons out expanding. Looks like the radar is on that low ground. Oh, I stand corrected. Okay, apparently they can see up there now. I don't think they were able to before, so I think the radar's gotten a little bit of height at some point. But yeah, okay. Looks like Chisato saving that max, picks off that tick. Meanwhile, there's some ticks on the other side. One gets picked off here, more in the middle of the area. And a couple ticks coming up here to the top. But yeah, I think, FlyingDuck here doing a reasonable job defending. And I think that the 2-con opener here is going to pay off. Second con is out now for Chisato, but, it's grabbing these back mexes with it. And let's see, where did that first guy go? Oh, the first guy's just right here, right? Grabbing these mexes here, putting down the tower, and advancing forward. So he's going to have to be really careful about this attack route because he's going to have less defenses and stuff there. So being careful with it, putting a tick there. Again, he has that radar to cover a little tiny bit of that area, so it shouldn't be too bad. But I think that early con out might help FlyingDuck here. I'm not 100% sure how well he does in this match. But yeah, sitting with a pile of units. Yeah, defense looks pretty good so far. I think mostly just kind of sitting back, chilling, making sure that he gets his expansions up and putting the game more into that later state. Bad Takes just running around trying to do what they can. Maybe gets this mex here. Nope, gets picked off. So yeah, just really good defense on both sides. Other tick tries to get in, but no dice. And yeah, I'm curious to see if Chisato puts out another guy expanding. So far it's just 2. This guy here probably going to be doing wins in a moment, as he desperately needs some energy. Commander is out expanding, though. Meanwhile, FlyingDuck's commander's sitting at base, boosting stuff. His metal is quite low. I'm not 100% sure if he can really afford this right now, but at the same time, you know, you're going to want that build power later on. So, you know, if you're a little bit low right now, like it's okay. But yeah, I would think that his commander should be moving out here. It's sitting here a little bit idle, and that's definitely a blunder at this level of play. You know, just any idle time you want to cut down because the commander has such a big amount of build power. 300 is a lot compared to this lab having 100 and, you know, this nano having 200, but, you know, certainly 300 is still a lot to sit idle. Attack coming up here with the pawns. It looks like FlyingDuck is not elected to expand up here quite yet. Instead, just, you know, going to be defending. He's got to be careful. I know. Looks like he's sending these units back. I'm not sure if he... I mean, I feel like he should have seen those pawns still, so I'm not sure why he would be sending the entire thing back. But looks like Shizada's coming around that way anyways. There is a small contingency on the left-hand side, and actually these pawns are sitting idle, so a bit of a blunder. Could certainly try to get in there, but now the pawns... You know, now FlyingDuck has noticed. Sending some units back. A couple of units popping off the line, going to be defending here. And yeah, just lots of build power, so just trying to, you know, just cranking out a lot of units here. Meanwhile, Chisato, you know, is banking up a little bit of money here. I think maybe just like testing his opponent, you know, seeing like, okay, if I build up some money here, maybe I can transition in this like air, maybe I can transition into T2 faster. You know, just hasn't built on a ton of build power quite yet. You know, in fact, needs some more energy too. So, you know, a little bit hurting in terms of that, not able to lay down a lot of pressure. And if FlyingDuck catches wind of that, he could certainly, you know, pressure along these back routes especially. But the game is rather slowed down at this time, despite it still being like T1 area. You know, and these players are just kind of feeling each other out. You know, I wouldn't expect Chisato, you know, to be well practiced against FlyingDuck, so maybe he's just like, you know, sitting pretty, making sure that, you know, kind of just feeling out what FlyingDuck is doing to you know, make the proper response. This con could get picked off here. There's quite a few pawns advancing forward here on the, you know, the bottom side here. There's a couple at the top as well that could potentially take out some mexes. And yeah, Chisato, you know, still a little bit behind on units. Definitely has a bit more energy coming in with all these solars being produced. You know, just unfortunately just building so much, you know, so many solars. It's a lot of metal that he doesn't have now because of that. Of course, he can reclaim it later. You know, so it's not like lost or anything like that. But certainly could produce some more units. In fact, it's kind of hard to catch up on units sometimes because... you know, your lab can only produce so fast, and that's even with, like, you know, plenty of nanos on it. You know, the nanos do have diminishing returns the more you add on to it. And that's mostly just because it takes time for the units to pop off the line and start producing the next one. Okay, so those pawns at the bottom are finally catching up to this expansion. Khan hasn't produced, or hasn't built the LLT yet. So these mexes are going to go down. The pawn's probably going to go down as units are filing into, you know, stage of proper defense. Yeah, FlyingDuck taking a good engagement here, gets the con, gets some units, and then just pops out, you know, doesn't have to engage these. So really good choice here, just making sure that he's not overextending and, you know, instead choosing to keep those units alive. Bit of a blunder there, losing the res bot for free. Yeah, little picks like that can be a big deal. You know, there's a pawn. I think there's... Oh, yeah, I guess it's just a single pawn up here. Trying to do what it can, takes out a mex, but or a couple of mexes, but not a huge deal, assuming... Yeah, I assume FlyingDuck's going to be able to handle this. Takes out that pawn, loses one for himself. Not a big deal, by the way, if you lose your own pawn on your own territory, because you can just, like, resurrect it. Not a big deal. Ooh, nice pinch here by Chisato. Catching these units. Fortunately, it was a little too wide when FlyingDuck noticed, and a couple of these I think are going to get out. So it was a good pinch, but at the same time, there was a way out. So yeah, the 3 pawns are going to survive for now. Mass amounts of pawns here. It looks like it was 17 to start with. Go, find the commander here in the center. Choose not to attack it. Plenty of LLTs. And also, it's, it's a fairly narrow space. And so D-guns can kind of wreck the place. You got to be really careful with all those LLTs that can be, it gives reason to think about it twice. Not quite enough to take all that out. Yeah, looking at our resources, Chisato still has, quite a bit of metal banked up here. But has also, out-expanded his opponent. So, sitting in a pretty good position here. Army value basically, pretty even here. But Chisato sitting ahead in other metrics is certainly going to help him out in the long term. Yeah, big engagement on the left. It looks like these pawns are forced back. A lot of them losing their lives there. And yeah, it's going to be more wrecks for FlyingDuck, but at the same time, I think the pressure's justified, seeing as he's fairly ahead here. Just trying to keep FlyingDuck on his toes. A couple pawns get in the back of Chisato's base, but yeah, they're going to be quickly handled or not. So they're going to run by. I think the LLT, though, will be able to pick these off before any major damage happens. Might lose a mech here, but, not like the biggest of deals. You can just resurrect that. Another engagement in the center. And, I don't know. I wouldn't mind seeing Chisato's commander, start inching some LLTs this way, control this wreck field. Especially if FlyingDuck continues to pressure down there. Or maybe he wants more engagements there to happen so that the wreck field grows even bigger. There is a sizable one on this right-hand side as well, so this is becoming important to, kind of maintain. FlyingDuck trying to get his resbot out over there. Doing a good job, making sure he's not, sacrificing these pawns here at the front. Just trying to control the reclaim field. I think that's really, really important. Yeah, lots of pawns coming off the line for FlyingDuck. Plenty of economy behind it. Unfortunately, has not recapped this mechs here. Yeah, it seems like, losing a bunch of mexes and not quite being that fast on recapping them. Maybe not being quite as fast on expansions. This kind of allows Chisato to just freely, expand pretty rapidly since he just has more cons going and doing it. And as long as he keeps them alive, as long as he doesn't lose too many, he'll be sitting pretty good. Yeah, sizable force here for Chisato. Going to be able to keep this reclaim field for himself. A couple of pawns sneak by on the bottom here. Actually, well, it's more than a couple. It's 18 to be exact. Air comes out for Chisato. He even shows the air. I guess maybe just putting him over there to see exactly how many pawns are here. And yeah, I'm kind of impressed by FlyingDuck here. I don't know them. I haven't really seen them play, and they're playing pretty well. I mean, it's not like, it's not like there's zero mistakes, but it's pretty good. It's hard to play bar at a really high level. But yeah, all those pawns get picked off. And again, that's, quite a few wrecks there for Chisato. Some more pawns coming up through the middle here. Deal some damage, get rid of that radar. But yeah, there is plenty here for Chisato. Bombers have come out. He does not have that much view of the base, but he, of course, has the starting view from earlier aggression. Does some bombing. Yeah, it does some damage. It's not huge, though, but it's going to force some fighters out for FlyingDuck. Yeah, and so far I feel like that's pretty typical. It's, it's kind of like Chisato's, taxing his opponents, saying like, okay, I'm going to have, do really well with my ground forces. I'm going to throw in some air at some points. And if you're, not ready to handle all these different types of engagements, you know, it can feel really stressful, and that, you know, certainly taxes a lot of lower OS players. You know, so kind of just like testing him and seeing, you know, what you know, what can I do? What can I do to tax your APM and your brain, essentially? But FlyingDuck not giving in too hard to the pressure, building on his own fighters for defense. You know, still producing grounds, but you know, in reality, it's really just a matter of Zeteo has built up so much more economy, even adding on some some tidal generators. You know, tidal generators not as efficient, but also, you know, they produce you know, they produce energy in a static way. You know, it's a constant amount of energy, unlike the wind.
Battle ended.
But yeah, FlyingDuck taps out there, just too much pressure from, you know, from the Banshees and whatnot. But yeah, let's load into game number 2 here. Looks like it's going to be on Eye of Horus. Another solid 1v1 map. One that I haven't seen as many 1v1s on, since Isidis Crack and, you know, things like Isidis Crack, Feast of Hades, and what's that other one? Canis River. I feel like those 3 maps have kind of dominated the tournament scene for a little while. So I'm glad to see, you know, some of these other older maps get thrown into the mix as well. But yeah, it looks like we're looking at game number 2 here.
Started.
Between Zeteo and FlyingDuck. Zeteo has spawned as our blue Armada player. Spawned in the center bottom. And at the top, of course, FlyingDuck spawned at the center top. Also playing Armada. Now these spawns, you know, just like any other map, it's like, you know, if you take a corner position, there's less routes to your base. If you take the center location, there's more routes. But one of the things that some people may not know is that, you know, bots can traverse some of these hills here, you know, and they're high enough that they stop radars. So you have to be really careful. If we look at the radar view, if you place one in your base, it's, you know, the coverage is shortened because of the hills here. So ideally you want, you know, some radar like on the hill so you can see further, you know, just to see that left-hand side. That can certainly come into play here. There's certainly a lot of directions that your opponent can come from if you're not careful. Oh, that was a bad line. It should actually be more like that or this. But yeah, lots of directions into your base. So you got to be really careful. And for that reason, aggression can be really nice here. So I expect to see a lot of pawns and a lot of ticks and not as many constructors. So first constructor coming out for Zeteo, grabbing that back mex. They've decided to start with 2 mexes and a solar. Meanwhile, on the other side, FlyingDuck, no solar. Does have that con out, grabbing stuff. So FlyingDuck needs to be a little bit more careful than Zeteo when it comes to the energy. You know, when energy's good, of course, you know, you don't really want a solar. They're so metal expensive. And you really want a lot of wind. So this opener, if the wind stays high, is certainly a little bit better for FlyingDuck. But I mean, there is plenty of metal. These mexes are huge. They're 2.9s. Yeah, they're a little bit more spread out, but there's certainly a lot of metal to work with on this map. So, you know, we'll see how it all plays out. But so far, you know, just some ticks roaming around, doing some scouting. Small engagements with pawns. Yeah, FlyingDuck laying down a little bit of pressure with the pawns. I feel like this is a bit much, though, especially if it's spread out. They're just kind of easy pickings if you're not careful. Now this, you know, this amount of pawns early on, like it's really more geared towards like if you open too many ticks, you know, then the pawns can do pretty well. But otherwise, they're not as useful being that far across the map, especially being alone. Now, if you work up a group of them, you know, then you can actually fight with them a little bit better. But yeah, just trying to find little bits where he can get into the base and maybe deal some damage. But no dice so far from either of our players. Actually, it looks like these ticks are getting pretty close to this con. I don't see a defense here. And Zeteo, you know, watches. He can certainly take that con out. Okay, well, he's not paying attention. These ticks get a little close to that pawn. The pawn's in pursuit, but there's plenty of ticks here, and I believe, or I feel like this con should definitely be taken out. But But yeah, I guess Chisato just paying attention more closely to his base. And, you know, I mean, I think that's you know, you want to spend your APM on the fence first and foremost. The aggression, you know, it's kind of, you know, it's important, but like, you know, is it more important than keeping your base alive? Probably not. But yeah, taking out the mechs here in the back of Chisato's base. FlyingDuck doing a pretty good job here, keeping the economy pretty similar here. Now, FlyingDuck has overproduced a little bit of energy. Chisato's a little bit under. Looking back at the, you know, the economy here. And I say that, but, you know, it's like if wind dipped down, FlyingDuck would be, you know, sitting pretty good. But so far it has not. Wind staying at pretty much max. And actually, he's getting in here. I mean, he took out, he must have taken out the con here, yeah. Taking out the mechs, taking out the con, very big deal, especially because that's quite the distance away from the main base. So getting another con out there, getting a resbot out there, kind of a challenge, or kind of a chore. You know, and then you got to protect it during that whole time and set up a, you know, set up your towers. So it gets pretty tricky. But yeah, lots of aggression here from FlyingDuck. Just units streaming, like, you know, every which way. Or I shouldn't say every which way, but like down these two paths, basically. So lots of threats on both sides, and if he's, you know, careful about his engagements, you know, not to lose too much, you know, not to give Chisato too many wrecks, then he could be sitting pretty good here in this second game between these two. But yeah, FlyingDuck actually a bit ahead on metal for now, as he's taking out a couple of those mexes. Losing that con was such a big deal, and even able, yeah, he's going to lose the second con on this side as well. FlyingDuck in a absolutely stellar position now. Because yeah, they only have one guy going out grabbing con, or grabbing mexes. You know, so this is allowing him to spend a lot more on units, and I think, you know, people forget that building economy does have a cost. You know, for every mechs that you build, you need to add on energy, and for every energy and metal that you produce, you need to add on more build power. You know, and so that's just like this cost that's not in units. So, you know, given that this is a shorter map, it's pretty close to your opponent. There isn't like, you know, it's pretty easy to run around in the back where there's these mountains and you don't have great radar coverage. You know, aggression like this can certainly pay off in this early game. But yeah, lots of units streaming out here from FlyingDuck still. And yeah, just like slowly getting ahead of the economy while he puts down so much pressure that Chisato's not able to expand. So I think Chisato's just kind of misread the map. You know, just having too many constructors out there. And yeah, I mean, maps like this, a lot more of it comes down to the micro. Chisato, of course, a little bit more known for having really good macro, really good economy. And certainly done a good job of it this game, but maybe he was trying to get away with a little bit too much here, a little bit too greedy with that second con. Because yeah, at this point, FlyingDuck has plenty of units out. You know, this can certainly smash this group of pawns. He's going towards the base now. He's got to be careful of these D-guns. The D-guns can certainly shut this all down. D-gun goes off, but it doesn't quite get the range. The pawns redirect at the last second. And yeah, now that all these pawns are reconvening to, you know, defend this base, it's going to be really rough for you know, FlyingDuck's not really going to be able to get in here. I think this is enough to, like, slow this down, prevent the push for now. But yeah, having to rebuild that, you know, build the stuff that's lost for Chisato is definitely a big deal, because it's a sizable amount of metal. You know, and each time this commander's not boosting the lab, that's more units that FlyingDuck's going to have now. So yeah, FlyingDuck actually snuck out a second con here, so he actually has 3 out in total. Even having that construction turret up here. Oh, actually, it's just started being built. So it doesn't quite have it online, but certainly going to be able to use it not too long here. And I think that's, you know, that's certainly the proper way to play this out, right? Like you, in a way, contain your opponent. You make it hard for them to expand. You know, and in the meantime, you're just adding on your own infrastructure to build up your army even larger in the long term. You know, because it doesn't really take that many resources to, you know, just constantly produce with your commander. So having that con turret is certainly very, very helpful. You know, I say that Chisato does have a consort for himself. I'm not 100% sure when he built that on, but, you know, that might be, you know, the timing of that certainly could have played into this. You know, if he built it too early, that could be another reason why FlyingDuck just has more units out. But, pawn's coming in the back, gonna disrupt this once again. There is another con out here for Chisato, but he's got to be so careful with it. This is like life and death right now, this one singular con. Because, yeah, he desperately needs to expand. You know, FlyingDuck here, you know, just sitting with this con, sitting with his commander and the con turret. Sitting pretty good. There's actually the idle cons back here. I think they're idle anyway. This one certainly is. You know, could be using it to expand, but, like, you know, at the same time, his focus is on the units, and I think that's really important. So if he takes some bad engagements, you know, that could really mean that Chisato has the opportunity to get some resbots out, start resurrecting these corpses, and now all of a sudden Chisato's in a, you know, maybe not a fantastic position, but like a good enough position that he can more easily fight back. Oh, this con's gonna get picked off here though. There's 3 pawns coming up here. If he pays attention, he could certainly chase after that constructor. Yeah, so the constructor goes down, and man, this is looking pretty bad now for Chisato. He desperately needed that. He desperately needs this aggression to stop. You know, so he's trying to lay down some aggression of his own. He's trying to send units across the map, but unfortunately for him, FlyingDuck already has plenty of units, you know, for defense, able to shoo those units away. And yeah, this just looks pretty grim at this point for Chisato. And I'm surprised. I mean, you know, FlyingDuck playing an excellent game. I think he read the map a little bit better than Chisato did. And Chisato taps out, you know? Game 2, Chisato taps out. I wouldn't have expected Chisato to drop a game against this, like, random person. You know, like, who are you, FlyingDuck? Like, but yeah, FlyingDuck having a really nice performance here. So, you know, being able to take a game off Chisato is not an easy feat. Chisato, of course, being our last season's champion. So, you know, that's pretty impressive. But yeah, let's load into our 3rd game. The series, of course, being all tied up now. All right, so the 3rd game is going to be on Heartbreak Hill, also known as Heartbreak Ridge if you're a StarCraft 1 enjoyer. It turns out, you know, this layout for a map is pretty good for Beyond All Reason. And yeah, there's been some, like, StarCraft remakes. You know, they end up being pretty fun, actually. They end up being a little bit more, like, technical. They end up being, like, you know, don't just throw pawns around the map, but instead, like, you got to think about your unit choices and how you do things, and it's a bit more strategic in a way. This map is probably the more, you know, more along the lines of throw units around at your opponent, but you know, placement of things becomes interesting with the ridges and hills and things. So we'll have to wait and see how this plays out.
Game started.
All right, so at the bottom right here we have Chisato, also known as Yanami, also known as Yudi, spawned as our blue Armada player, taking the usual spawn position here. You know, the 3-mech start. And then meanwhile, we have FlyingDuck spawned as our red guy at the top left. Once again, this is Heartbreak Hill. And yeah, already we see some difference here. Chisato opting to go for a 3-mechs start into solar. And meanwhile, FlyingDuck, you know, doing the thing where you get 2 mexes, 2 wins, and then go for your 3rd mechs. Now, you don't really need this wind turbine before your 3rd mechs, but it helps you get a little bit more energy so that by the time you put down the lab, you have something to work with when it's like done and starting to produce. Otherwise, you start running out of energy immediately, and you know you become pretty desperate for some more energy. And especially if the wind dies down during that point, it can certainly put you behind. So definitely a more safer play. But yeah, just adding on some more wind. You know, no big deal. Getting some ticks out, probably getting some constructors too. Chisato, meanwhile, getting a resbot first. adding on a second solar feels like a bit much, but solar does build a little bit faster per energy generated. The break-even point for build time is 12 wind speed. So like the amount of time that you put into building it breaks even then. In terms of resources, of course, it's closer to like 5 or 6 depending on your faction. But yeah, Chisato just opting to get those solars, which allows him to get a little bit faster, bits of energy so that he can crank out units, in a better amount of time. Also, just if wind dips down like it just did, this is certainly going to help him out a little bit. Meanwhile, over here, FlyingDuck having to add on a lot of wind turbines because it's just not the solars are actually paying off better at this point. So desperately needs the energy. So now is adding on the solar. So I think the bits of solar early is certainly going to pay off a little bit. As we take a look at the map here, we have plenty of Chisato units out here. Not that much for FlyingDuck yet. We do have one con out, one resbot out for Chisato. FlyingDuck does not have a resbot, but just produced that first con. Now has 2 cons out, but still is in desperate need of a little bit of energy. So the wind's still staying kind of low, making it so that he, really, really needs a second solar here maybe. But yeah, it's like, do you really want to spend that 150 metal for a second solar, or are you just going to kind of wait it out? And I think waiting it out, the wind's now back up. So, FlyingDuck's going to feel kind of good about that. But at the same time, Chisato, already in a slightly better position for it. It looks like this metal extractor got picked off at some point. But yeah, once it gets resurrected, Chisato's going to be slightly ahead at that point. But yeah, just, a few more units for Chisato. I mean, I think the army difference is probably, 204 metal here, and then for FlyingDuck, 216. It's pretty equal. Actually, with these units coming out, it's a little bit, it's even more even. But yeah, second con going out now for FlyingDuck, grabbing some expansions. And of course, the more expansions that you start taking, the wider your territory becomes and the harder it is to defend it. So, both players with 2 cons out now, it's just going to be a bit more stuff to defend since you don't have overwhelming odds at this point to keep your opponent back at your base or back at their base. But yeah, I would expect to see, little skirmishes here and there. I don't think it's not so much a map where you're going to ball up a bunch of units and go attack one location. It's more of a, I'm going to run around and be everywhere kind of map, and hoping that one of these positions just isn't covered by radar. In fact, let's talk about the radar positioning a little bit here too. FlyingDuck, positioning his radar in a fairly normal spot. This is the typical spot. Just allows you to see over that ridge. Whereas Chisato's placed the radar a little bit further, like away from it. Whereas FlyingDuck's is a little bit more like here. And that makes it so it's harder to see over here. But at the same time, it allows them to see up here a bit better. So this con a little bit more protected for it. Another common thing is to put a radar on this ridge. But I don't see either players quite up to that points yet. And yeah, so normal expansion paths for the cons is basically what FlyingDuck's doing. Like you go here, you grab these mexes, and you continue up here, grab this stuff, and then you continue on and grab this middle point. And then once all that's set up, all these mexes back here are fairly safe. So, FlyingDuck doing the more normal thing, whereas Chisato, doing that, but also, prioritizing, maybe some of these mexes, sending units over there a bit more. And yeah, so I think FlyingDuck's in an okay position, but Chisato, again, just slightly ahead on income because of the faster con move out. Let's see, do we have any nanos yet? We do not have nanos yet. No nanos on this side. And when I say nanos, by the way, I mean construction turrets. It's just like the old name for it. And, the old name that people still use to, shorthands the construction turret. But yeah, just, pretty slowed down here. Another con coming up. I would think that there would be a construction turret coming out here pretty soon so that he can leave with his commander. Chisato has actually boxed himself in here with his commander. It looks like he was trying to leave, but no dice. Gonna have to reclaim one of the solars, which he probably doesn't actually want to do since his energy is dipping down at the moment. But, you know, sometimes you get a little, you know, you're trying to be so efficient that you accidentally box yourself in. You know, and by efficiency, I mean like you're building around your commander so that the commander isn't moving so much. Yeah, getting boxed in is not really ideal either, so it gets a little tricky at times to, you know, make sure that doesn't happen. But yeah, it looks like FlyingDuck is going to be the player to lay down some aggression here. And yeah, actually quite a few units at the top here is going to be able to shut this down. Probably going to get this con. Self-D started on the LLT, not quite soon enough. And so, yeah, these pawns are going to take the position out and probably start moving on towards this bottom position. Meanwhile, these units here are going to be picked off. So Chisato, you know, now getting units in the position to you know, take this, you know, this group of pawns out. I think these are going to get this mech probably, but I don't think there's going to be a ton of damage. I feel like if Chisato positioned just a little bit better, he'd be able to take that. Well, I guess he does get all of them anyways, but I was starting to get into a position where he was chasing after those pawns, and that's not going to be ideal for you know, for trading. It's going to be a little bit worse of a trade, and possibly some of those pawns get out alive. So just got to be careful with some of those engagements. But yeah, FlyingDuck coming up here for defense. LT's already in position, so that's pretty good. I guess instead of electing for this 4 mechs cluster, has just elected to place some towers back here and grab these mechs here. Which, I mean, honestly, I see that more commonly, but I feel like taking this position's a little bit stronger. Because, yeah, then you don't have to worry about putting up defenses for this location later on. You just already have it. Yeah, so FlyingDuck's sitting in a, you know, a pretty reasonable position here. You know, in terms of economy anyway. Army advantage is in Chisato's favor. You know, but it's like, you know, what are these units actually able to do? Like, this aggression's completely stopped by the chain of LLTs there. This aggression here is doing a little something. You know, but there's plenty of units out here, you know, for FlyingDuck. And then, you know, even able to shut down this position, or this aggression here, and save the Resbot. So yeah, the Resbot's going to be picking up all these units. It's starting with the construction bot. I want to make note of that because, you know, if you got the awareness to know, you know, where your construction bot is, like, that is, of course, the better thing to pick up first so that you can start, like, using it right away, like Chisato's doing here. But yeah, I think Chisato's playing rather defensively, and I think he's going to continue to do so. As you know, this map gets kind of tricky because the middle position here is so wide open. Like, I mean, I guess I should say the mexes are spread out, so there is no clear, like, take this mex and this is your forward, you know, stronghold, middle, center, you know, position. It's more usually left open because the side mexes are so much more valuable. You know, which makes the map pretty interesting because it makes it harder to see what's going on. You kind of need to have units at, you know, at the top and the bottom, and it makes defending kind of challenging because now you have to pay attention to so many things spread out across the map. You know, so that's why it becomes more of a game of running around with pawns or grunts and just seeing what you can do. You know, trying to set up a line of defense and then also pressure with that as well. You know, and some of you might be asking, like, well, why don't they add on, like, a mace or something? And it's like, well, maces are good units, but they're pretty slow. And it's really easy to just run around them and get into a better position. And so it's you know, not ideal for such a wide open map like this. But yeah, these pawns coming in here doing a little bit of damage. And if they got this constructor, it'd be huge. Yep, okay, constructor goes down. You never really know because, I mean, you know, these pawns are coming in and things can die rather quickly. A bit of damage at the top as Chisato breaks this position. Gets past one of the LLTs. And yeah, that becomes a, you know, such a challenging thing if you don't have a radar, especially which it looks like FlyingDuck did not. You know, because if a player builds up enough units, they can certainly push past LLTs. And it's sort of like you need to support the LLTs with units for defense if necessary. And without that radar, it's really hard to know that that's coming ahead of time, so it's hard to position your units to defend that location. Yeah, FlyingDuck kind of doing the same thing to Zeteo at this bottom position. But yeah, Zeteo here does have, you know, some radar on the high ground. It's not like, you know, it's not over here to see like even further, but it's close enough where he's able to see it and say like, okay, let's send some units. Now I think this is he's doing this trick with the bot lab. Oh, okay, yeah. So if the pawns don't kill the blueprints here, then you know, they can get stuck behind it like that. It's pretty interesting. So I guess that's why you do something like that to you know, slow down the advance a bit, or at least like separate some of the advance so it's easier to pick off individual units. So yeah, Zeteo does a pretty good job defending that. Whereas I was expecting the pawns to be able to get by there. Back at the top, we see some more aggression from Zeteo, trying to, you know, poke back at this location. Unfortunately, he's getting taking a lot of free damage from this LLT, but it's going to get forced out of there. A couple pawns survive. And yeah, now at this point, Chezado's like, you know, since he's been able to keep that bottom position, even has a Khan alive, you can certainly re-expand to this location and start moving, you know, to take the center position. But yeah, with that, you know, Chezado's in a slightly better position metal-wise. And FlyingDuck has spent a little bit more on energy, and I'm not sure if he's really needed to. He has plenty of energy coming in. You know, not converting it, which, you know, there's quite a bit of excess at times, so I wouldn't mind seeing that. Decides to put down a second bot lab, and I think this is a really good choice. I mean, you can switch into tanks if you want to on this map. You do that by putting the lab on the top, or the vehicle plants on the top here, so that they don't have to, like, go around. But yeah, just choose... Oh, okay. He was going to put down a bot lab, decides not to, puts down an air lab instead. Now he's producing 5 bombers. And I think this is a reasonable choice as well. But you got to be really careful because, you know, pawns can attack air. You know, they do have anti-air bots that are, you know, that can traverse over some of these more difficult terrain pieces. And, you know, it's a little bit better of an idea versus vehicles. And so, I don't know, there is this meta where, you know, at around a certain time, as the map gets clogged up with stuff, you know, you kind of expect your opponent to go vehicle. And so maybe he's just trying to do the, you know, the meta that I guess the counter meta to that. But yeah, lots of pawns coming in here for Zeteo. FlyingDuck doing what he can, but unfortunately these lines of units are not in ideal locations. And some of this gets picked off. But yeah, there's going to be a lot of wrecks here as these pawns die. See, bombers have taken off, though. Does he have... okay, he did not send the scout. So this is a bit of a blind bombing. And you can pretty much expect you know, buildings to be here, but it's going to be a little bit blind. Yeah, some of those bombs like these did not really hit anything at all. You know, could space it out a little bit better. But it's hard to know where where the enemy buildings are without sending the scout. But yeah, some reasonable damage here, but nothing unrecoverable. Especially since Zeteo has a bank of metal and plenty of energy still coming in. Let's see, does he have a bunch of storage? Only, well, okay, yeah, he does have 5 storage. I only saw 1 at first, so I was kind of confused. But yeah, there's going to be an air lab coming up for Zeteo as well. And yeah, you know, it makes me wonder, like, is it just going to be some bombers? I mean, is it just going to be some fighters? Is he going to, you know, try to take air dominance and then switch into something like bombers or gunships? We'll have to just wait and see. Meanwhile, it looks like FlyingDuck has decided to add on some more bombers here. Trying to do it again. Says, you know, there's some success with the bombing. So why not go for it once more? And I think this is a tricky spot for FlyingDuck. I mean, you can kind of assume that your opponent's going to have anti-air now. It's not like you're trying to surprise him with bombers. And so it's going to, you know, probably do a little bit less. And at the same time, you kind of need to like go into ground to threaten. You know, you just like force Shizato to build anti-air, so his ground should be a bit weaker. But yeah, going double with air can be kind of risky. And this fighter's out now. But yeah, a little bit of damage so far. The bombers kind of come in one by one, a little bit too spread out here. So a lot of them are being taken out. And yeah, just really not that much damage here. Another one comes in. Yeah, I mean, it takes out a mechs and stuff, but like, you know, all these energy storages are keeping Shizato's energy in line. Plus, like, it's actually generating plenty to, you know, maintain, you know, his energy needs. Or, you know, keep up with his energy needs. And yeah, I mean, I think Shizato's still sitting pretty after that. So, you know, and even having some gunships out for himself. So, you know, gets that air dominance and then just gunships to, you know, take out these mexes. You know, and that's really annoying to deal with. You know, so I think, you know, maybe a bit of a... Oh, okay, so he sold the air lab, you know, and then realizes, like, oh, okay, I actually need fighters right now. There's gunships about. You know, and I think that's just such a smart play from Chisato, just saying, you know, I'm not only going to build fighters, I'm instead going to also produce gunships, so then if you do get out of air, you know, you still have to deal with it in some ways. So, you know, definitely a really nice move from Chisato, and I would expect that to happen more often in the future, because it is such a, you know, just a good thing to like lay down some pressure from above and force your opponent to build anti-air. Yeah, being able to threaten these different positions, like, once again, like, it just, like, puts pressure on your opponent, like, do you build fighters? Do you build, you know, static anti-air for your base? Like, you know, what kind of things are you gonna buy to do that? And I think just the air lab being offline for a minute is the real reason for that. But yeah, a bunch of pawns get into the base here. Multiple angles. And yeah, Chisato quickly, you know, has put up some Dragon Claws, so like he's sitting okay, but some of them do get in the back. Commander defending this other engagement on the side. And yeah, there's certainly going to be some damage here as Chisato loses some energy. But once again, you know, I gotta point out these storages. There's just a lot of storage, and even if he loses like even more wins, he'll still be in okay position because of that. You know, these storages are kind of tanky, so it's kind of rough. And I think that was probably, yeah, that was a GG there. Chisato takes the win. You know, I think at that point, FlyingDuck just realizing, like, you know, too much of the map ended. You know, is being controlled by Chisato. And, you know, he's just a little too behind, unable to do enough damage to you know, make up for that. So anyways, that was game 3. Hope you guys enjoyed these matches. I certainly did. And, you know, I'll be continuing on casting the rest of Alpha Cup. So I know some of these were already streamed, and that's okay. I just figured, like, you know, I'm going to give my 2 cents, you know, do like a half cast, half analysis kind of thing for funsies, because I enjoy doing this kind of thing. But anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed watching, and, you know, stay tuned for some more.